All
Judaism.
right, everybody, we're back, and it's time for episode 150. And tonight we're going to be going into Judaism Part 4, Sex and Marriage in the Talmud. We're going to be getting into all of the claims about, all the nasty stuff that we hear being spread around about the Talmud and Judaism. And we've spent the last couple few weeks checking all of these citations and really digging into all the meat on this stuff and finding out what the citations actually say. Before we kick off tonight's show, we're going to do a brief summary of some of the news that's happened in the last week and whatnot, and some of the things regarding Islam that have come up. So, probably going to hit on that for about 7 or 8 minutes here. So, we're going to dig right into it. We have a lot of material to cover. So, Lloyd, you want to take over?
Yes, everyone, glad to be back, and thank you for watching the show. So let me share my screen. I'm sharing my computer sound.
There it goes. Let me just turn
Okay.
off the recording here, too. We don't need that. Get that out of the way.
Okay, so next 7 or 8 minutes, that's all we've agreed on with to just go over this material. This, you might remember, is the Baphomet goat. It has the same symbolism as we have here, the Islamic crescent and the five-pointed star. This is a clip someone sent us. Thank you very much for that. This is from the Satanic Temple, or the Church of Satan, and they will play about 30 seconds of this. They talk about how this is connected to them.
Have what's called the Baphomet. And that image was elaborated in the 19th century by an occult historian named Eliphas Levi. But the word Baphomet comes much further back from the Templars, who were accused of heresy, accused of worshiping the devil. And it was said that they worshipped an idol called Baphomet, which almost certainly came from Mahomet, Prophet Muhammad from Islam. So it's kind of this imaginary structure when during the Crusades, when Islam was Satanized, and so we have it there. Now it's recognized as a universally kind of satanic symbol.
It was Satanized, they claim.
Yeah.
I mean, Bath goes way back. Like Moses, there was Bathists, right? People that were... Anyway.
Look, yeah, but this is different.
Probably should be careful playing too much of this, because we could get a copyright strike.
I'm done there.
Okay.
The interview is called Mancow Interviews the Satanic Temple, and that's available on YouTube. Unfortunately, he's about to continue, but he gets cut off by the host, Mancow. And but I thought that would be interesting. He talks about Islam being Satanized, and he confirms with Baphomet being Muhammad and part of the satanic worship. Okay.
And that, of course, is straight from the Church of Satan. So it's not just the academic saying it. It's not just the Oxford English Dictionary. It's not just Wikipedia, etc.
Yeah. Okay. On this score, a couple of points. We're going to be very quick, just going through a few points. This is a talk that was delivered to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2010. It says Saudi Arabia constitutes 1% of the world's Muslims. However, they pay 90% of the expenses of the entire faith, overriding other traditions of Islam. The Saudis are Wahhabists. They're part of the Salafi strain, which is the literal strain of Islam, which you would call radical Islam. So on an annual basis, Saudi Arabia spends 3 times as much in exporting its Wahhabi ideology as did the Soviets in propagating communism during the height of the Cold War. That is because Islam is a political system, and it is comparable to totalitarian political systems like communism, Nazism, fascism, and so on. Now, it says here that they've been spreading this from Netherlands to Bosnia to Algeria, Tunisia, you name it, all over Europe and even America. And they've said that over the last several decades, local Islamic traditions are being transformed and radicalized under intensifying Saudi influence. That money that they're spending is going somewhere. So, German parents fined for not sending son on a mosque trip. I don't know of any parents that have been fined for not sending their son on a church trip, but ask yourself. In Sweden, some Muslim boys raped a 14-year-old girl. They were allowed to stay in school because the judge called that rapists are victims too. Okay. 2 Muslim men were arrested for planning an attack on a Jewish kindergarten in France. Catholic churches are being desecrated all across France, and officials don't know why.
Yeah, and that Notre Dame was burned up yesterday, in fact.
And European churches are being vandalized, defecated on, and torched every day. In France last year, there were 2 attacks on Catholic churches every single day across France. 2 attacks per day, including arson. And this is from the Smithsonian. Canada Archives acquires a book that would have guided a North American Holocaust. The report details the population and organization of Jewish citizens across the US and Canada. It would seem the Nazis had global ambitions. Now, New York cleric Muhammad ibn Munir, Muslims should hate non-Muslims, can only maintain relations with them to call them to Islam. That's on the Memory Channel. We've played something from them before, would be worth watching. This is entirely in keeping with Islam and Sharia. 900 churches in Nigeria destroyed by Boko Haram. How many mosques are being destroyed today? However, and Nigeria is 50% Muslim in the north.
And then there was a report that how do you pronounce that?
Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Yeah.
Oh, there was a fire close by.
Okay, it was a fire close by. Okay.
Okay, point to note. This has been leaked recently. This just came up in the news. Obama's government and Obama kept a list of Muslims for top government jobs, and the list excluded non-Muslims. Think about that. You can look up this article about Obama's special appointment of Muslims only into top-tier government positions in the US. And finally, last article, this article called Moral Hazard, The Life of a Liberal Muslim by Franklin Foer. Very well worth reading. I strongly recommend this to find out about Islamic infiltration into academia. It's actually quite a frightening read. Okay, that's it from me.
I read that, yeah. All right, so let's get back let's dive into the Talmud. That's what everybody's waiting for tonight. And so does the Talmud promote child marriage and pedophilia and all of that stuff? What does it actually say?
Yeah, so that's something we want to get into tonight. So first, a brief introduction of Judaic law in the Talmud, the oral law, and then we will discuss does the Talmud permit pedophilia the way Islam does? We all know in Islam, Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl, even though he already had 3 wives. So, okay, now there's an old saying. So note that some of the details will be repeated for emphasis and clarity. We need to make some things clear, but also some of the topics, unfortunately, have merging and overlapping concepts attached to them. So there's an old Jewish saying where there are 2 Jews, there are 3 opinions. Now, and Maimonides, the great Jewish scholar, said a written document, no matter how perfect, is always open to misinterpretation, which is true. Although I must admit, I once got some furniture from IKEA, read the instructions, and built a bicycle. So the point of that is to say that human words can be read accurately. We know this because when we follow a recipe for making soup, we don't end up with a car, because it's quite possible to have words say what they mean. And while yes, misunderstandings can happen, we also are able to accurately understand things. So to start with a joke, a young man goes to a rabbi and says, "Please explain the Talmud to me." "Very well," says the rabbi, "but first a question. If 2 men come down a chimney and one comes out dirty and the other comes out clean, which one washes himself?" "The dirty one," says the man. "No," says the rabbi. They look at each other and the dirty man thinks he's clean and the clean man thinks he's dirty. Therefore, the clean man washes himself. Now another question. If 2 men climb up a chimney and one comes out dirty, the other clean, which one washes himself? The young man smiles and says, "You just told me, Rabbi, the man who is clean washes himself because he thinks he's dirty." "No," says the rabbi. "If they each look at themselves, the clean man knows he doesn't have to wash himself. So it's the dirty man who washes himself." Now, one more question. If two men come down a chimney and one comes out dirty, the other one comes out clean, which one washes himself? I don't know, Rabbi. Depends on your point of view. It could be either one. The rabbi says, no. If two men climb up a chimney, how could one man remain clean? They're both dirty, and therefore they both wash themselves. Scratching his head, the confused man says, Rabbi, you asked me the same question 3 times, and you gave me 3 different answers. Is this some kind of joke? This is not a joke, my son. This is Talmud.
Yeah, that about sums it up.
That's actually a really good idea of what the Talmud is. So the oral Torah, the Talmud, the oral law is a legal commentary on the Torah. The Torah effectively are the first 5 books of Moses. Now, and these explain how its commandments are to be carried out. So the oral law, so common sense suggests that some sort of oral tradition was always needed to accompany the written law, because the Torah alone, even with its 613 commandments, is an insufficient guide to Jewish life. So, for example, you have the 10 commandments. Now take the 4th one, which is remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, Exodus 20, verse 8. So now it is clear the Torah regards the Sabbath as an important day. The question is, how does one observe it? What are the stipulations? What are the rules? What are the regulations? This is the logic of, or the question of the Talmud. So the scriptures want us to ask, what do they mean, and how does one interpret them, and how does one apply the law? So the Orthodox Jews believe that God taught the oral Torah to Moses, and he taught it to others down to the present day. The tradition was maintained only in oral form until about the 2nd century of the Common Era, which is what we call after AD, when the oral law was compiled and written down in a document called the Mishnah. Over the next several centuries, additional commentaries elaborating on the Mishnah were then written down in Jerusalem and in Babylon. Babylon, in this case, would be Baghdad, I believe, in Iran. These additional commentaries are known as the Gemara. The Gemara and the Mishnah together are known as the Talmud. The Talmud was completed in the 5th century. So there are actually 2 Talmuds, the Jerusalem Talmud, also known as the Yerushalmi, and the Babylonian Talmud, also known as the Bavli. The Babylonian Talmud is more comprehensive, and generally when people say the Talmud, this is the one they refer to. Now, there are additional commentaries on the Talmud. There are scholars such as Rashi and Rambam who have written commentaries, and Adin Steinsaltz also completed a new edition of the Talmud with his own commentary, supplementing the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Rashi commentaries. Rashi really wrote commentaries also on the Torah, so he's a very well-known Torah scholar. So the Talmud is not easy to read. It is not a book that is meant for casual reading. Think of someone's class notes for a college lecture that you never attended, and it's 400 years of class notes, right? And there are gaps in the reasoning where it's assumed that you already know what they're talking about, that you're familiar with the concepts. And also, it's expressed in a kind of shorthand. So there's a lot of assumption, there's a lot of foreknowledge that you need to have. And biblical verses that support the teaching are often referenced by only 2 or 3 words. So it does assume a lot of knowledge. Now, the Talmud preserves a variety of views on every issue, and it does not always clearly identify which view is the accepted one. Right? Keep note of that. It doesn't always identify which view, because the point of it often is just to debate an issue and discuss an issue, identify the implications or possibilities of a legal issue, rather than come to a conclusion. It is not a book. It's a reference. It's a guide. It's a casebook of law, for those who understand what a casebook is. So the Mishnah is divided into 6 sections called Sedarim in English, orders. So each Seder contains 1 or more divisions called Masechtot in English, we call them tractates. And there are 63 tractates in the Mishnah. About half of these tractates have been addressed in the Talmud, and they all have different subject matter, although the debates and discussions are scattered all throughout the books. So they're not always in sequence. They'll meander, and they'll come back to each other. And it's really, you really have to know it very, very well to know where what is. That's why the additional commentaries by Maimonides and others were written to summarize all of these concepts and keep them into easily found sections. So there's a lot of free associations, and it's not always, it jumps all over the place. So the Talmud is not designed for casual reading. Now, although it is printed in book form, it was never designed as a book. It was an oral record of the law. So it was a code to interpreting the written law. It was not written down, although scholars made notes. Now, for about 1500 years, the Talmud was memorized, or the arguments of the sages or the rabbis were memorized, and a scholar was required to know much of it by heart. Once there was the destruction of the Second Temple, which is about 70 BC, the rabbis had to compile the written editions of the Talmud because of the exile. So while a book must be written for an audience, the Talmud is not written for a general audience. It is really written for the rabbis, right? And these are the debates, and debates can get pretty harsh. So the audience were other Talmudists, and they were ferocious debaters. Now, the Talmud actually wanted debates. The debates are incredibly visceral sometimes, okay, and there's heavy disagreement. So the Talmud contains minority opinions, and it also contains contradictory and even incorrect opinions, right? So they believe that you have to learn together, that you have to debate together, and you have to fight for the truth. They must argue with every fiber. It was never taken personally, but they wanted a high level of truth, and opponents would tear each other apart in these debates if they made a mistake. More on that later. So the term Talmud refers to the Babylonian Talmud, okay? And the Talmud is composed of the Mishnah. So the Mishnah means written instruction or teaching, and the Gemara is a clarification of the Mishnah and related writings. So the Mishnah then is a commentary on the Torah, and the Gemara is a commentary on the commentary. So we have now the Somsino English translation is over 12,800 pages long, and that's excluding indexes and commentaries. Okay, so to help Jews better understand the sometimes rambling Talmud, Maimonides, known as the Rambam, produced the Mishnah Torah, and called the Book of the Strong Hand. This work is the Code of Jewish Law, or Halacha. And he then wrote a second book called the Guide to the Perplexed. Now, another book that was written to clarify the oral law is the Shulchan Aruch by Rabbi Yosef Karo in 1563, which sought to clarify the Mishnah Torah and also present a practical guide to Jewish life. Any questions or comments so far, Ian?
Yeah, Dashing Rogue asks, would the Talmud be more akin to a Bible concordance or a group of concordance? It seems a bit like a group of case laws.
It is case law. It is a case book of law. I'll get to that in a minute. Yeah. So
right.
I'm trying to just cover the subject in general. But it is a case book of law, really. It's a series of legal problems upon which students are encouraged to think and provide their opinion, and also to see what other rabbis have thought through the ages.
And just to show that, what I want to do, Lloyd, is one more time, I'm going to show the Talmud on screen for the audience and use Google Translate to show them what all of these are so that they can actually see how it breaks down. So let me just pull that up here. So we have the Talmud up here on screen. So I'm going to switch to Hebrew here. And so we can see that that's the Hebrew. So I'm just going to grab all of this and put it into Google Translate so that people can see what these titles actually are. And, a lot of people really seem baffled about what the subjects are. So I showed this last week, but just to run down on the screen here. We can see exactly what a lot of these are. Some are New Year, fasting, small date, celebrations, the order of women. Some of these obviously aren't translated very well. Addresses, vows, monks. Here we have one that's dealing with perverts. Okay, so we have the order of torts. Some of them translate directly. We have beatings. We have idolatry, parenting, sacrifices, offerings, secularism, firstborn, values, exchanges. Down here we have embezzlement, etc. So it's actually a book of laws, and no place in this book of laws does it say it's okay to molest kids. What they'll do is they'll present an example of arguments and then go through what is pilpul, or peppering, and break these arguments down to the extreme. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay, no, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, well, I'll expand upon what Jan was saying. So the Talmud reveals a diversity of information from the Torah, and it provides the experiences and revelations of the elders of the Jewish people. In this case, this would be the rabbinic teachings, obviously from the Pharisees onwards through the rabbis. Now, they do believe, and again, some of this would be detailed in a future episode to go into more detail on some of these specifics, but they believe that Moses received the oral Torah along with the written Torah at Mount Sinai, and that it's been with the Jewish people from the beginning. Now, this is disputed by many others, and we will put forward an argument on that point, but hopefully a rational one and not a hysterical one. Now, this knowledge was written down, edited, and codified by the Jewish sages. That became the Talmud. So I'll skip over this. And so the meaning of some of the chapters, I'm going to go through 4 of those. Now, the claim of the kitty fiddling in the Talmud is really derived from 2 sections. One deals with crime, right? In fact, the chapter opens with a discussion of rape and numerous scenarios of rape and what the charges are that need to be applied. And the other one, where people misinterpret and distort the verses, are from a discussion on conversion and marriage to converts. So Sanhedrin, right, is one of 10 tractates in the Seder Nezikin, a section of the Talmud that deals with damages. This would be civil and criminal proceedings. The Gemara of the tractate is noteworthy as precursors to the development of common law principles. For example, the presumption of innocence and the rule that a criminal conviction requires the concurrence of 12. That would mean 12 judges to oversee the court proceedings. Now, interestingly, for criminal proceedings, you can't just read the Talmud and say, oh, the Talmud says chop his head off. It doesn't work like that. There are stipulations within the Talmud that say, for this crime, you need 3 judges. For this crime, you need 7. For this crime, you need 12. For this crime, you need so many judges. You need to go through these procedures. You need so many witnesses. The witnesses must meet these criteria. So it's actually quite detailed. It's not as simple as people make out. It's not. So you can take one sentence or even one distorted paragraph, but that is not an accurate idea once you look at it. The Sanhedrin chapter is all about damages and criminal proceedings. So in other words, the damage that your action caused to another person and your liability and your penalties. That's what it discusses. Bava Kama, I can't read the words Bava Kama these days without thinking of Owen Benjamin, discusses various forms of damage and the compensation that is owed for what this person has done to another. Damages and torts, basically a civil wrong that causes a claimant to suffer loss or harm resulting in legal liability for the person who commits the tortious act. Yevamot is about women. It has a focus on marriage and conversion and marriage of or with converts. Avodah Zarah deals with damages as well. The main topic of the tractate is laws pertaining to Jews living amongst Gentiles, including regulations about the interaction between Jews and idolaters and Gentiles. Now, the Talmud, again, comprises the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Mishnah is a code of law, a commentary on the Tanakh, right, the 5 books of Moses. The Gemara elaborates on the Mishnah, and it is a commentary thus on the commentary. So there are 63 tractates divided into 6 sections. So thus there are roughly 10 seders per tractate. So this set of teachings and commentaries on the Torah form the basis for Jewish law. So it contains the opinions of thousands of rabbis from different periods in history. Now, it has been written such that comments on a particular topic from rabbis from the past are connected. The same conversation is had by rabbis in a later period are connected, so there's one long flowing conversation. So those people may not even be alive to have had the conversation, but it shows the development of the law and opinion and the change in the opinion over time. So the Talmud is the oral Torah, a Jewish tradition, and an exposition of the Tanakh. Okay, so Rabbinic Judaism is derived from the Mishnah, which is derived from the Torah. It is the Jews' primary book, or Judaism's primary book of Jewish legal theory. It's a study of Jewish law. So the code of Jewish law was compiled in the first 4 or 5 centuries of the Common Era. That's AD. Together with the Gemara, it makes up the Talmud. By laying out different opinions concerning Jewish law, it presents itself as a casebook of law. So a document that describes a life of sanctification, of course, the rituals of the temples and so on, but it also contains a dispute between different rabbinic sages on thousands of issues. And it includes lots of contradictory and conflicting opinions, okay? So it is not the code of Jewish law, it is a study book of Jewish law. So it discusses the code of Jewish law. So the Mishnah means to study by repetitions from the verb shanach, to study and review, and also meaning secondary. So secondary as to the Tanakh. Now it can be argued, and it has been argued, that this book has superseded the written law, but that again is for a future date. So it's the first major written collection of the Jewish oral traditions, known as the Oral Torah. Okay, and it's also the first major work of rabbinic literature. So while the opinions of the minority included with the opinions of the majority, even though the law is not like that. That's a question, okay? So the answer is so that the later court can examine their words, and I will get into more of why that is, okay? There's lots of discussion. So it includes minority opinions, it includes incorrect opinions, it even includes the opinions of students who are posed the question by the senior rabbi. He gives them the problem and he gets their opinions. So I could go in, grab the opinion from a student who knows nothing, completely wrong, and say, but the Talmud says. And this is a problem. This would be entirely misrepresenting what the book actually says. So one could determine the law based on the Mishnah. Its intention was to train the sages in thinking through the legal issues that inform Jewish law, or the halacha, right? So you can determine law based on it, but it's designed to train sages in thinking through the legal issues. The Mishnah contains multiple opinions on many laws and often does not suggest which is authoritative. So it contains stories, it contains moral stories, it contains legal stories, it contains historical discussions, it contains debates, often it actually doesn't have a conclusion. So there'll be discussion, it just ends, and there's no conclusion. And sometimes you're lucky, there is a conclusion, but sometimes you've got to read through 40 or 50 or 60 paragraphs to get to that conclusion. So someone grabs a sentence from paragraph number 2 and says, the Talmud says. No, you've got to go through the entire discussion to the end. And sometimes the end is 5 chapters later. So you'd be reading through 50 paragraphs, it suddenly switches topic, and then 2 hours later it gets back to where it was. So,
2 hours later, pretty much, huh?
Yeah. So the Gemara interprets the Mishnah. It has historical stories and moral stories. So it's from the first few centuries, right? So scholars have extracted legal principles from the statements of case law. They're searching out derivations of the legal statements from scripture and relating statements found in the Mishnah to traditions that were left out. All of these oral discussions were edited together in a manner that places generations of sages in conversation with one another. So we'll be about another 15 minutes to 20 minutes at most on this subject. We're about halfway. It is an effort to harmonize biblical and rabbinic traditions, largely by providing proof texts for known laws and explaining differences between the biblical and rabbinic versions of the laws. So this is the origin of the Gemara, right? It covers prayer, holy days, as Jan showed us, agriculture, sexual habits, contemporary medical knowledge, superstitions, criminal and civil law. So the Gemara contains both halacha, which is legal material, and the Agadah, narrative material. If I slaughter these words, forgive me. Agadah, historical material, biblical commentaries, philosophy, theology, and wisdom literature. Now, the thing is, it doesn't always clearly say that which is which. These are, you have to know the Torah. You've got to be a rabbi with some training to understand, or at least a scholar with some training to understand which is which and distinguish between them. It's not always clearly explained. So stories reveal information about life in ancient times among Jews and between Jews and their neighbors, and also folk customs. All of these are just blended together. So it tries to explain unclear words or phrasing, but it also contains very unclear words and phrasing. A lot of it is in legalese, legal lawyers' terms. It also provides precedents or examples to assist in the application of the law, and it offers alternative opinions from the sages of the Mishnah. Okay, so it also cites biblical verses, and for nearly every law discussed, it introduces the connections between the biblical text and the practices and legal opinions of its time. So if you go through the evolution of the law and the culture, you'll see that, for instance, their views on the law changed over the years. So different rabbis have different opinions, and they have more lenient views, and they start to change and they shift. Because one truth of the Talmud is that it says that when you live in a country, the law of the land is your law. So they had to adapt and modify according to where they were.
That's correct. I have a quote here somewhere on that. Do you happen to have that quote ready?
No, I don't. I was planning to cover that another time, but yeah, you gave it to me earlier.
Yeah, I don't know where I put it. If I
Well,
find
look
it,
it up and see. Try and find it. So multiple opinions of sages are weighed against one another, often without presenting conclusion. Now, a casebook, to Dashing Rose's question, a casebook is a type of textbook which is used primarily by students in law schools. So rather than simply laying out the legal doctrine in any particular area of study, instead of saying this is the law, a casebook contains excerpts from legal cases in which the law of that area was applied. So it shows you multiple different scenarios in which the law was applied, and it discusses the details that make those cases both similar and different. So the student then has to analyze the language of the case to determine what rule was applied and how the court applied it, and even why the court applied it. So casebooks sometimes also contain excerpts from law review articles and legal treatises, historical notes, editorial commentaries, and other materials that provide background for cases. Okay, so those are things to keep in mind. Now
somebody says the Talmud is definitely bad. Is that true? I mean, obviously, these are people who comment in the comments who have never bothered to read or actually look at what it says. All they see is these one-liners, and that's the sum total of their education of it.
We've been debunking these quotes as we've been going over the weeks, and we've showed how these quotes have been falsified.
Right.
But also, I think the aim is people are having to protect their reputations because they've been saying things about. Show me one of these Talmud falsifiers who have gone through the Talmud in the kind of detail that we have in the last 3 weeks.
None of them, and what they'll do is they'll say it's abrogation or it's pilpul or
abrogation is an Islamic term. It's in Islam,
but they won't actually address the full quotes that are found in the Talmud, which we are going to do here. So anyway, so Dashing Rogue says the Talmud is an archive of chat logs from a legal forum with conversations by case law lawyers about case law. That would be very accurate, yes.
That is a very good way of phrasing it. It's about 80% that, apparently. It's about 80% that, and the rest is these stories and moral stories, traditions, and history, and so on. But yeah, that is very much what it is. If you read it, the crime of the Talmud is being freaking boring.
It is boring, and I've read at least 500 pages of it, and it's not exciting reading, to say the least. But
it's got some funky things. I mean, just to read some of these opinions, like, what are these people thinking?
Right. That's true. And I've got I've got a lot of these up here, and eventually I'm going to release this. I was hoping to have this ready for release today, but it's going to require more work. But so far, just about every one of these, when you go through and you actually read it, you realize that the claims are false. And I think we're going to cover this one today. If the ox of an Israelite gores the ox of a Canaanite, there is no liability. And the outcome is false. And you can go through and you can just, what they'll do is they'll cite one line. They'll take like one line, and then they'll ignore all of the rest of the discussion about it. Right. So
these discussions go on for dozens of pages sometimes.
Right. And so, what I'm going to do is hopefully this week I'll get it done, but I'll release this, and then you can just click on this and you can read the actual citations and see that people like, Daniel at Activist News, Handsome Truth, all of these people, they're actually selling complete lies. And that's why they're so busy banging the thumbs down, because, this is exposing them as essentially, in my opinion at least, as frauds. They're selling a hate agenda, and they're not interested in the truth of this stuff getting out. So all of these, when we actually go through, we can see that they are false.
Yeah. So I'm going to quote from a book I've been reading, which I will use as the basis for another episode. Fantastic. And I will discuss the book and talk about the authors and so on in the future. But so the Talmud, the rabbis saw themselves as rulers, but philosophers as rulers. They saw themselves as philosophers. And so they envisaged this rabbinic utopia which involved a society which put intellectuals, the philosopher, at the top of the pyramid, right? And they were looking to emulate the ideal philosophical government. Plato, for instance, put together the idea of the ideal philosophical government. So they modeled their ideas after Plato and Aristotle. And the high point of this would have been when the Jews were in Alexandria in Egypt and they met the Greeks, and they got to learn Greek thinking. And so they modeled, or they paralleled, the ideas that the Greeks were putting forward. And also you had the Plato's Academy. And so they modeled the yeshiva on the Greek academy. So the members of the Sanhedrin, which was the ruling council, the governing council, and the judges, had to be knowledgeable in all wisdom. And it was very important that they were very, very knowledgeable of the world, especially the wisdom of the Greeks. So Maimonides, the great scholar, considered himself a disciple of Aristotle. He saw Moses as the chief philosopher, and he even referred to rabbinic Judaism as a philosophical religion. Now, the rabbinic law, and in fact, the whole literature of the sages, was influenced by Plato and Plato's Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy. So the studies in the yeshiva are characterized by the same characteristics as were found in the academy, which is endless contradictions and multiple arguments. Now, the Talmud has a method. So the method of the Talmud, the logic behind some of the crazy discussions in the Talmud, is called shakla v'tatria. And it operates, and this is very important for you to note, this operates on the premise that the search for truth is never a monologue and is not carried out by an argument aimed at deciding, aimed at coming to a decision. Instead of achieving agreement, the goal is to expand knowledge by the multiplicity of possibilities. In other words, to apply your knowledge to every possible permutation, to look at every possible factor that could change a situation. So what are the possibilities? How old is this person? Is it a mother? Is it a father? Is it a daughter? Is it a brother? Is it night? Is it day? Is it, are they legal age? Are they not legal age? Are they perpetrator? Are they victim? Are they willing? Are they not willing? And so applying your knowledge to every possibility of that circumstance, and then finding what knowledge you can create from that, rather than saying, this is the decision, it goes to, how can we multiply this knowledge by examining every possibility? So this is very similar to what we would call scholastic philosophy, which deals with casuistry and abstract dialectic negotiation. You can look those up in the future. I'll cover this again in the future, but so
if you're having trouble sleeping at night, pull up the Talmud and start reading this stuff, and it'll knock you right out. It's probably the most boring legalese, and sometimes it goes into ad nauseum discussions of nonsense. But if you're having trouble to sleep at night, rather than counting sheep, pull up the Talmud and start reading it.
Yeah. So it has been said that the entire Mishnah is one great display of debates. So the Rabbi Shimon school historically had 1,500 students, 500 of whom studied Greek wisdom, and they had heated debates about the law. Right. Now, the Talmud does include an excess of detail, right? But it also incorporates multiple viewpoints, stories, and digressions. It has page after page of discussions, and it was very complex. So in the Middle Ages, there were numerous attempts to codify this. I need to finish this shortly. Two are noteworthy. In the 12th century, Maimonides, or Rambam, composed the first true halachic code. That's the Mishnah Torah. It was revolutionary at the time and written in simple Hebrew. And then afterwards, Joseph Caro, who after fleeing from Spain, the Golden Age, why would he have to flee? He composed the Shulchan Aruch. Let me just fix the spelling there. So this work, together with some additional work, remains the most important code of Jewish law. And it categorized all of the laws, the scattered laws that are throughout the Talmud. And then, of course, you have some other books that were written as well, shorter codes and so on. There are additional books as well that people tend to quote without, everyone says, it's the Talmud. No, it could be one of half a dozen or a dozen different books which are often quoted, right? Which quote the Talmud, but it's not the Talmud. There's a thing called the Tosefta, which is much larger than the Mishnah. The Tosefta are supplements. So they contain interpretations of Judaic laws, and these interpretations sometimes support the Mishnah and sometimes contradict it. So it contains a lot of materials that the rabbis left out, right? So it contains all sorts of interesting stuff. So these are called excluded materials, right? And they emphasize, they discuss different topics, they provide different ways of looking at the problem, and they also provide examples of false arguments, bad arguments, as in avoid these arguments, look out for these arguments, look out for this reasoning, avoid this. There's another book called the Pirkei Avot, The Ethics of Our Fathers. I discussed that last week in more detail, which asks questions like, if I'm only for myself, who am I? Say little and do much. The world stands on three things: service and acts of loving kindness, right? That's not all three things, but I mentioned those last week. So on judgment, the full quote is, on three things the world stands: on judgment, on truth, and on peace, right? So they talk about execute true judgment, do justice between man and man with no respect of who someone is. Don't differentiate, don't discriminate between people, but be just, pardon me, to all men. And this is based, so these ethics are based on the Old Testament, the Tanakh: administer true justice, show mercy and compassion. So I'm going to end off this topic in a moment. So the Talmud also says that there are four groups of people that do not merit to greet the divine presence. One of them is liars. And the punishment is measure for measure. Through lying, they
demonstrate. Why don't you
demonstrate
highlight that there so people can see what you're reading there easily?
Sorry, this is here. So the Talmud says there are four groups of people that do not merit to greet the divine presence. One of them is liars. Okay? So through lying, they demonstrate that they sought to find favor in the eyes of men and ignored the presence of the great Almighty. Therefore, they do not merit to be in his presence. The Talmud actually speaks very strongly against lying. And the Talmud also says there are three types of people that God despises. One of them is those that say one thing while having completely different feelings in their heart. Okay, and that is my introduction to the Talmud. I think that's all there's more. I've got tons more here, but it's no point going through that. It's just expansion on what we've already discussed.
All right, so let's dive into the sex material that people, and some of the quotes. We had somebody a couple of weeks ago, Fibonacci, in the chat, and he was screaming, "What about Yabamoth 11b? What about Yabamoth 11b?" And if he had just looked in the Talmud himself, he would have seen that citation was entirely fabricated.
Remember, he's got the secret Talmud, which he doesn't have. That's why he doesn't quote from it, because he has it and he knows it and he's convinced of it, but he doesn't have a copy to show any of us. Has anyone sent you that secret Talmud yet?
No, nobody's sent me the secret copy yet. I've been asking everybody for it, but unfortunately, none.
They claim they have it. They say they know it. They're sure of it. Send us a copy.
Yeah, well, I mean, because obviously they got the quotes from the secret Talmud, so they should be able to just provide us this copy of the secret Talmud. But just really quickly, before you go into that, I just want to show this Yebamoth 11b quote on screen here. It's not even found in this section, and you can just, when I get this released, you can just click on the link right there, and you can see this is Yebamoth 11b, and it translates it. And then if you don't trust the translation, some people were complaining, oh, well, the translations are fake then. So you can just go right here, and then you can put it right into, for instance, Google Translate, and you just paste, and it will translate so you can see what it actually says and verify these translations here. And the highlighted words, the bolden words, are actually what is said in the Talmud in the Hebrew there. And so this is like, the English translation. They give it more explanation and more clarity. But it has nothing to do with what people like Fibonacci and others have said. In fact, just very quickly here, the correct citation would be the one right above, I believe, which is Ketubot 11b. And again, that one is false. And, if people want to pause that, and we'll be going into this more in just a second, but they can read what it actually says. And, they have to take all of these citations completely out of context because, it's a hate agenda and they're not interested in truth. They're not Christians. They don't have, they don't care about logos. They care about, spreading the hate agenda, and that's why they're so interested in suppressing these talks. You there?
Yeah, I'm still
All
here.
right, all
No,
you.
good.
Go ahead.
Cool. Face value, 9/11 was an inside job. No, 9/11 was an Islam job.
And I used to
Okay.
believe the inside job stuff too. And the more I've looked at all of this, the more I've begun to, question the inside job narrative as well. And it's hard to, stop blaming. It's like, okay, what if the government actually told us the truth on this?
That's off topic. Let's move on.
Yeah, you're right. Let's
something
go.
else. That's off topic. Okay, so there are about 3 or 4 quotes which are constantly tossed around. Yes?
Oh, I was just going to say you were just cutting out a little bit there. Go ahead.
Okay, now. So there are 3 or 4 quotes which are repeated endlessly, which, with the claim that the Talmud justifies sex by rabbis or sex by older men with little girls of 3 years old and such. And we're going to discuss that now. I'm going to go through this in detail. We're going to discuss all of the aspects of this issue. Now, I will state up front that within a few minutes, I was able to discover this quote: "The seduction of a minor girl is considered rape." And that's in the Talmud in Yevamot 33b. I have to ask why scholars like Heikel Moffman and others couldn't find that somehow. How all these people could misquote legal discussions but couldn't find a very clear sentence. This sentence is repeated at least 4 times. I discovered it 4 times in the Talmud in different places. The seduction of a minor girl is considered rape.
Let me just interrupt you for a second there now. Alex Newman in the chat, he just donated $49.99, and he says, "There is no secret Talmud. I will pay 10 Bitcoin to anyone if proved otherwise." Okay, so folks, to put that in dollar terms, he is offering $50,000 for anyone who proves that there's a secret Talmud. So, and thank you, Alex, to your support there. Go ahead, back on topic.
Yeah. Okay, so note that sentence. Note that sentence. I've seen for years, and I believed all of these things. I will admit, I believed all of these things until I started reading the Talmud. Okay, so please don't take my word for it. Go read the Talmud for yourself. Understand it. But so let's have a look around the world. 1 in 5 girls in the world are said to be married before 18. In other words, married while underage, and therefore, and 18 could mean a 9-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. It just means underage, and therefore having sex while underage. 650 million women alive today were married as children, and 12 million girls are married before the age of 18 every year. And I think, where is that? No, that number's wrong. Never mind. 1 in 5 girls in the world married before 18. So let's look at the top 20 countries. I think I got that sentence wrong. So let's look at the top 20 countries with the highest prevalence rates of child marriage. Now, if this was a norm in Israeli society, we would see that, and it absolutely is not. So Niger, 76% of women are married underage in Niger, 68% in the Central African Republic, 67% in Chad, 59% in Bangladesh, 52% in South Sudan, 52% Mali, 52% in Guinea, 52% Burkina Faso, 48% Mozambique, 47% India, 45% Somalia, 43% Nigeria. And the list goes on. You'll notice the top 20 list is all not Israel. Okay, it has 0 data. There's literally 0 data for underage marriages in Israel. Notice that most of these countries are either primitive black countries or Islamic majority countries, right? They tend to have a similar trend, or they are third world countries, or they are majority Islamic countries. Now, Palestine, everyone's favorite, has a 15% child marriage rate, and no one seems to have a problem with that. It's okay when the Palestinians do it. Now, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, the founder of the Islamic religion, had a 6-year-old wife. We discussed that at length in episode 5 on Islam, which was on women and the death of Muhammad, right? And no one seems to have a problem with that. It's only bad when it supposedly says on the Talmud, but when Muhammad was actually literally having sex with a child, that's okay. Let's not talk about that. When the Palestinians who walk on water apparently are doing it, well, let's not talk about that. So hypocrisy. The highest levels of child marriage are found in sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, notice these countries are all not Israel. And the highest rates of child marriage by country are observed in sub-Saharan Africa, and the largest number of child brides live in South Asia. So by country is sub-Saharan Africa, and by just total volume is South Asia, where 46% of girls are married before age 18. So in Indonesia, you've got 1% before 15 and 14% before 18. You have Malaysia, Sudan, and you have Pakistan, 203 million. They've got only 3% of the world population, and they have huge numbers of child marriages. Okay, so 50% of all marriages in Pakistan involve girls less than 18 years old. But just by sheer coincidence, it's an Islamic country because Muhammad did it. It is in the Sharia. It is legal in Islam to do so. Now, notice this is Jakarta. A cleric with child bride should be jailed for 6 years. The court told he was already married, but he says that she became the cleric's second wife because the cleric said this was valid under Islamic but not civil law. And we covered that in detail in episode 5. So I'll skip
the
over
last
that.
series, you mean? Or you're saying the next one, sorry.
Episode 5 of Islam. We covered that.
Yeah.
So 53% of all married women in Afghanistan were married before the age of 18 and 21% before 15. That varies, though, by region. So not all this information is 100% known because it's hard to get some of it. But yeah, I collected all the most recent up-to-date information, Yemeni girls and so on. But yeah, let's not look at the fact that it's an actual norm in Islamic countries, whereas, with well over 50% in some cases. And yeah, but let's talk about imagined pedophilia. So concerning the marriage of a minor girl. So it says in Deuteronomy 22:16, my daughter I have given to this man. So this is often interpreted by the rabbis that a father has the right to contract a marriage for a minor daughter who herself yet has no inherent legal right to contract one for herself. And there's numerous references that are given here. Okay. Notice, however, that none of the codes treat this text as legally binding. So it's not that a father can't contract his young daughter to someone for marriage, but he's not bound to, right? So he could also not do so. Now, notice, though, what is not discussed and what is not explicit within the Talmud is that because these are lawyers and these are legal terms, they make distinctions between the words marriage, the consummation of the marriage, and betrothal, and contracting for a marriage. And there's another term that I've forgotten, but they make a separation and distinction between these terms. So a girl can be betrothed, right? So a 3-year-old girl, for argument's sake, and this is going back in history because it's not a practice today, but a girl could be betrothed by her father, for argument's sake, or her mother or her brother, whatever, if the father's dead, to someone for marriage. She could be betrothed to another 3-year-old. And when they're old enough to get married, when they're 18 or 20 years old, they've then agreed that these two will get married for whatever reasons. That was a fairly common arrangement. It doesn't mean that they're having sex at 3 years old. No, it means that they've agreed, these two, but a girl can also be betrothed to multiple men. In other words, a contract has been, or at least an agreement has been formed between numerous men. And when the girl is old enough, she will make a decision as to which one she wants. And that is what these things imply. So several issues arise, concern about a marriage conducted without the consent of one of the partners, and concern about the possibility of legally sanctioned intercourse with a prepubescent girl. So this is discussed in all of these Pesahim, Yevamot, Ketubah.
Yeah, we lost you there for a second. Wait till
so
you're
they
back.
discuss what is the possibility of legally sanctioned
We just
intercourse
lost you for
prepubescent.
we just lost you for a second. Repeat your last couple sentences.
Okay. So within the Talmud, they discuss several issues that arise from the idea of contracting a girl into future marriage with someone. So there's concerns about marriage conducted without the consent of one of the partners, and concern about the possibility of a legally sanctioned intercourse with a prepubescent girl, which most morally sensitive people have long regarded as de facto rape. And as I mentioned above, in this quote up here, the Talmud considers that as rape as well. So let me go back down.
And that's Yevamot 33b for those who missed that citation.
So by the 3rd century, a rabbinic decree was issued in the name of the Babylonian authority Rav, okay, or the Palestinian authority Rabbi Eliezer. It is forbidden for one to contract a marriage for his daughter when she is still a minor, until she is mature and she can say, it is X whom I want. That's Kedushin 41a. This appears numerous times, actually. It also appears in the Mishnah Torah of Rambam, right? So there's Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, Hilkot Ishut 319, and there's numerous other references as well. Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher Arba Turim, there's the Shulchan Aruch, and there's others, right? These are all mentioned here. So she must be mature enough to say, I want to marry X. So it is assumed by some commentators that this decree intends to eliminate the possibility that once a woman who was married, forced to get married, in fact, by her father when she was a minor, upon becoming an adult, she will then reject the husband who was forced upon her. The concern of the rabbis is that marriage is supposed to
highlight that again so people can see that.
That's right here. She will subsequently reject the husband who was forced upon her. That's the section here.
And so that's Kedushin 41a, folks. You can check these citations yourself.
Kedushin 16b, and there's other references here.
Right. So all these people that take these quotes out of context, they got something. They're clearly, spinning a lot of lies and just selling hate.
So this follows from the rabbinic assumption that marriage should be contracted with the intention of permanence. That's in Gittin 90b and Yoma 18b and Tosafot Yehudeh. So one can very well interpret the reason for the rabbinic prohibition being a rejection of de facto rape. So Rabbi Menachem Meiri says the whole development of the institution of Jewish marriage as resulting in the elimination of the coercion of women, what we would now call marital rape. Okay, so we've got this book here, there's, oh good grief, Bet HaBehira Kedushin, Sofer edition, page 8, Ketubot 72b and 82b, right? Notice, I'm going to contrast this just with two verses from Islam, from the Quran and from Sunan Abu Dawud that confirms the Quran, where it says, your wives are as a tilth unto you. Approach your tilth when or how you want. That's Muhammad speaking in the Quran. And in Sunan Abu Dawud, 1298, Messenger of Allah, how should we approach our wives and how should we leave them? He says, approach your tilth when or how you will. A tilth is a plowed field. He says, go plow your fields when or how you want. The context of that story is men who wanted, bluntly, may I say, anal sex with their wives, went to Muhammad and says, our wives don't want to submit to us. What is your ruling? And he says, go do as you please when you please. That is Islam. Women have no right to reject sex with their husbands in Islam. Judaism, however, in total contrast to that, protects the rights of the wife. So contrast those two. So earlier rabbinic sources are more concerned with the issue of sexual intercourse between an adult man and a female child. Okay, so now there's the example of Rabbi Eliezer. At the insistence of his mother, he married his niece when she was a minor, but he did not consummate the marriage until his wife reached maturity. That's Yevamot 13:2 and 13c. And Natan B, there's Avodah Rabbi Natan B, chapter 48, whatever, Nida 13b. So this is all based on the notion that the primary purpose of marital intercourse is procreation, something that would not result from intercourse with a child. So it became a prohibition because marriage is meant to be permanent. Someone should choose their spouse, and that the whole point is procreation, which would not happen if this was a child. And thus marriage, all of these other laws would be broken if one allowed this. So there's a principle within Judaism: what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. And this says you shall love your friend as yourself. And they use this principle is that you wouldn't do something that is hateful to someone, that someone would consider hateful. Therefore, you would try to act ethically and morally. All right. And so this idea has influenced their concept of the law and dealing with your wife and dealing with others whom you would marry. So now let's look at some older Talmudic regulations, right? So there are differences between scriptural norms and rabbinic norms. Now, the Talmud is an accurate rendition of what the rabbis said, even though they may be wrong, even though it might be contradictory, even though these are debates and people are taking different sides. Some are playing devil's advocate. However, people take a line from the Talmud and say, look what it says. Now, the issue is that the rabbis do not want to delete anything from the Talmud because it is a record of what was discussed. So what happens is when an opinion was formed and times change and thinking changes, the law changes. What happens is that the rabbinic norm is reinterpreted. So the rule is repealed, okay, or it is radically reinterpreted, but the reference is not deleted from the Talmud. So the rule remains, the sentence remains, it's there. But the rabbis know that either that has been reinterpreted or has been rejected based on, social change. So people can go back and look at old discussions that are no longer valid, right? And they'll say, well, look here, it says this. No, it no longer says that. That was 1,000 years ago. That was 2,000 years ago. They've stopped that, back in the first century. So basically there are consensus among the halachists or the legal scholars not to explicitly repeal any Talmudic decree, right? But reinterpretation is the method of effecting change when needed. So there's a lot of Idiot 1.5, Avodah Zarah 36a, Rashi. There's a whole bunch of Maimonides, Hilchot Mamrim 2.7, Yosef Karo, Kesef Mishnah, and there's a whole bunch of these references here. So you can go to a sentence and say, look, it says that. Yeah, but that might have been forgotten. They might have removed that law 2,000 years ago, right? So it's no longer valid. It's just a historical record of something that was said. Again, back to the meaning of the chapter, Sanhedrin, right, means damages and civil proceedings. So it's all about criminal proceedings. Then Bava Kama is damage and the compensation owed by harm or legal liability for someone who causes harm. Yevamot's about women, and Avodah Zarah is about women. Now the Talmud. So the Talmud discusses, for instance, in one example, the Talmud discusses what's a minor, and what category is it after a minor, and what category is before a minor, and what's an adult, and what is pubescent, and what's prepubescent, and how old is this, and what's a woman. And they have different, so there's about at least 8 different legal age categories in the Talmud. I don't know them all, they've got some weird words for it, but there's at least 8 of these categories. And in this example, a girl, until she's 3 years and 1 day, okay, so she's a minor until 3 years and 1 day, and then she moves into another category. And a boy until 9 years old and 1 day, then he moves into another category. Then they go into another category at 11, and I think there's another one at 12, and then so on, right? A girl 11 years and 1 day, and a boy and so on. So it says that these ages are only approximate, and you'll find other sections in the Talmud which have different ages again, right? Especially as they get older. But this idea is drawn from, in accordance with the verse, your breasts were formed and your hair was grown. Ezekiel 16, verse 7. I let you grow like the plants of the field, and you continued to grow up until you attained to womanhood, until your breasts became firm and your hair sprouted. And then God says, I passed by you again, and I saw that your time for love had arrived. But notice it's in reference to womanhood. The reference to sex is the reference to womanhood. So Talmud Sanhedrin 54b, if you read that, is a very interesting display of what's called responsa. So this is basically opinion, counter opinion, opinion, counter opinion, opinion, and it's just this back and forth, right? And it provides scholarly legal opinion on sexual matters, right? Now, the Talmud does not advocate having sexual intercourse with girls below 3 years of age. It makes the legal statement that a girl who has had intercourse before 3 will have her virginity restored by the time she is of marriageable age, and thus she's eligible for a full dowry. So let's go look at care of minors. It says in the Talmud, perhaps we are dealing with a case of a minor girl and she lives with her mother because of concern for her safety due to an incident that occurred. That's in Ketubot 102b, verse 18. An incident occurred and the boy lived with his father's heirs and they slaughtered him on the eve of Passover. So too, a minor girl is not left in the care of those who are obligated to sustain her and who have a financial interest in her demise. Ketubot 102b, verse 19. So the Talmud goes at length on about this, and it discusses that little girls and little boys must be cared for. They need to be looked after. There must be no harm that can come to them, right? So basically it talks about the abuse of minors, the risk of abuse, and the care that must be taken to ensure the safety of minors. Other comments that talk about, there are comments in the Talmud which talk about if a minor girl is being injured, like sexually, then this is nothing. And people use, look what these rabbis think, that they have these, that they don't care, it's nothing. Well, nothing is used as a legal term, and I'm going to give you several different examples of how this is used. So what is the implication of the clause, any action of a minor girl is nothing? conclude from this that even generally, without a specific steward, a minor may not conduct transactions involving real estate. With respect to a minor girl, any action of a minor girl is nothing from a legal standpoint. A minor would have no authority in this matter. Essentially, a minor, for instance, if she inherits a house, cannot sell the house. She cannot undersell the house for too low a price, because the court would then reverse that decision, because she's too young to make the decision. She's too young to take any legal steps of that nature. So that's what the nothing means. And people sort of get hysterical about it and say, oh, they say that's nothing. You can ignore a little girl has been sexually molested. No, what they're saying is that this does not affect her legal status. She's not considered corrupted. She's considered clean and pure. And when she's older, she can get married as a virgin, and she doesn't come across legally as someone who is now no longer a virgin, which affected them in the culture.
Unless she's older than 3 years and a day, and then
unless she's older than 3 years and a day, yes.
Right. So this is taken extremely out of context by the hate groups who can't read more than one line.
Yeah. So the Gemara explains, with respect to a minor girl, any action of a minor girl is nothing, but who teaches this? Okay. So, and it says, in this case, a minor girl who is not capable of selling, her sale is invalid. So the word nothing is used in multiple different contexts, but it's again a kind of legal shorthand. Okay, so this has all it means is this has no effect legally. She is not affected. She cannot be harmed by this. Her reputation cannot be harmed by this. So the Gemara continues its analysis. From when she had sexual relations, the Gemara expresses surprise. So didn't Rabbi Eliezer say the actions of a minor girl are nothing, which indicates that marriage and intercourse with her are not considered an act of acquisition? Right? Rather, we must say that he meant from when she matures and has sexual relations, then the act has legal significance and an impact on her status. Now, legal categories by age. Okay, the Torah does not deem the intercourse of one who is less than 9 years old to be like the intercourse of one who is at least 9 years old, and so on. And for intercourse to have the legal status of full, and as for a male's act of intercourse to have the legal status of full-fledged intercourse, the minimum age is 9 years. This law no longer applies. This is just historical. So the Torah does not deem the intercourse of a child who is less than 3 years old to be like that of one who is 3 years old. These again apply to the legal categories, the different ages, the 8 different categories that I mentioned earlier. Beth Hillel said to Beth Shammai, a girl may exercise the right of refusal when she is a minor, even 4 or 5 times. The daughters of Israel are not ownerless property. That's Beth Shammai. So in other words, a father could want to betroth his daughter, in other words, sign a marriage contract for future marriage regarding his daughter, and she is capable of refusing as often as she wants. She can say no, because he says the women are not ownerless property.
So let me just interrupt you. This guy, Daniel from Activist News, who calls for the murder of gays, he's actually saying that we're watering down pedophilia in the Talmud. We're actually providing the quotes on screen that anybody can fact check. And also, so, he's clearly lying, and he's very afraid of, his hate speech getting exposed and him being exposed as a fraud. Anyone can fact check these citations. They're up there on screen.
Yeah. And obviously, his reputation's on the line, because the whole discussion on the sex with a 3-year-old is in a chapter that begins with a discussion on rape. If you go to the freaking chapter, the discussion of sex with that little girl is in a chapter that starts with rape.
In a legal book, it's a law book, and it's a discussion about rape. See if you can, put
and then also,
2 plus 2, Daniel. I know you're a little short on the IQ level there.
And also, if you read the discussion, right, if you go through the discussion, if you go to the citation, it says, first of all, first example, father rapes daughter. Somehow, no one thinks that is permission for fathers to rape daughters. Then it goes to father rapes daughter of X age, Y age, and Q age. Then it's about brother rapes sister. right? Then it talks about, are they willing, were they unwilling, with how old are they? It discusses every permutation of that and what the consequences are, what the legal consequences are, and what the punishments are. Again, no one confuses that with permission for sons to rape daughters, right? For brother to rape sister, or father to rape child, right? Then it goes on to older woman, younger boy. Then it goes on through about 24 different, I don't know, 24 different examples of rape. And how do we consider this? What if it happens inside the house? What if it happens in a field? What if she's alone? What if blah? It goes through like 24 different examples. What if an uncle does it? What if an aunt does it to the nephew? It goes, you read it. It's all of these examples are examples of crime and discussed as crimes, discussed as rape, discussed as things which must be punished by courts. And then you get to the discussion of, oh, a little girl has sex. And suddenly, oh, that's permission, that's permission. The other 25 were all examples of rape, but this one for some reason is permission. Nonsense. I'm sorry, excuse my French. Bullshit. Total bullshit. How is every other example a crime? And this one, suddenly, this one at the bottom of the list here, because it goes to different ages as it goes lower and lower, that one is permission. Nonsense. And it's in a discussion on rape. So moving on, excuse me for getting upset. So either she makes a declaration of refusal. Now notice, the daughters of Israel are not ownerless property. She makes a declaration of refusal, and then she waits until she is of age. Or she makes a declaration of refusal and marries immediately. So she is allowed to reject someone who wants to marry her as often as she wants, because she's not property. Now Muhammad, we can go back to the statements where he says, this woman is my property, and he shags her rotten because she's property. Whereas they say the daughters of Israel are not property. She must make a decision, she can refuse, and she can wait. So also, with regard to a minor girl with the corresponding stage of intellectual development, after the death of her father, she can be betrothed by her mother and her brother by rabbinic law. Now, betrothed doesn't mean married in sex. It just means that there's a legal contract that says we will get married in the future. But she can opt out of that betrothal through refusal. Try that in an Islamic family. The Gemara says we found a source for agency with regard to divorce. From where do we derive that there is agency with regard to betrothal? Okay. And it says here, what is unique about divorce is that divorce can be effected against her will. So the law, the rabbinic law says that if someone wants to get divorced, the husband can get divorced against her will. While, however, betrothal cannot. A woman cannot get married. Now notice, the laws of Moses, the 10 commandments, do not commit adultery, do not commit sexual immorality. It says so very clearly. Sex before marriage is forbidden in Judaism. In fact, it's legal. It's in Christian law. I mean, not Christian law. In Christianity, it's also a religious stipulation that we should not have sex before marriage. That is a sacrament that should be upheld, right? That sex comes with marriage. Now, in Judaism, this is also the law. So to have sex prior to marriage would be breaking the law. So for them, sex is within the bounds of marriage. And it says a woman cannot be married against her will. So, okay. So she's able to say no if she doesn't want to. According to Beth Hillel, Beth Shammai offers a moral objection, right? So it says here, when she's still a minor, according to Beth Hillel, if she's a minor, she may be married off as many times as her brothers and mother wish, and she may later refuse as many marriages as they offer. And he says, a girl could be betrothed, but according to Beth Shammai, not married. So they have a legal distinction between the word betrothal and the word marriage, right? So they may be betrothed, but not married. To several men, rather she either waits until she is an adult, etc., etc. She waits until she is an adult. Now notice it says the act of a minor has no validity at all. She is to be regarded as one seduced. So, and that is considered a crime. Sex with a minor is regarded as the little girl did nothing wrong. She was seduced, right? And again, they have legal definitions of these terms, which lay people like us don't have and don't use. So for relations with a minor, there are greater legal consequences than relations with a deaf girl. A deaf girl can't hear what you're saying. So they discuss, look, what if the girl's deaf and she can't hear you? She doesn't understand. She doesn't know what's going on. And they say, well, a 3-year-old or 2-year-old has even less knowledge of what's going on. And also, the minor will be fit for marriage after some time. Again, minors are not permitted to have sex. They need to be old enough to understand. Okay? So the minor is also instructed to reject any marriage in the Shulchan Aruch 171.10, given this context. Okay? So they talk about that minors, sex with minors, have greater legal consequences than with adult deaf girls. The minor will be fit for marriage and she must be protected for marriage. So the Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do Rav and Shmuel disagree? And they talk about the intercourse of such a child, a young child, does not have the legal status of intercourse. And that is what nothing means. So that she's not considered raped. She's not, no, the perpetrator is punished, but she is not affected. She's not considered spoiled. She's considered still pure. And when she's old enough, she gets married as a virgin. She is entitled to, because she's young and she's innocent. Okay, this thing goes on about homosexual sex. You name it. You name it. You'll find it in the book. Okay, so the Gemara goes on. There's lots of discussions around this that it talks about. Notice homosexuality. Now, the same passage that talks about sex with the minor girl, right, and the complications and the legal liabilities of sex with a minor girl, also talks about homosexual sex. Where does it permit homosexual sex? Nowhere. Okay, they make it very blatantly clear. Nowhere does it permit sex with father with daughter or brother with sister. So how are they reading this and going, okay, so we've got these dozens of examples of illicit sex, illegal sex, of crimes, but this one on the list, the same one that's on the same list, yeah, that one's permission. Nonsense. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense.
Yeah, the people who promote that idea, like Activist News and HT and these people, they're just, all these hate groups, the GDL, et cetera, they're just so dishonest. It's absolutely ridiculous. And they refuse, even with all of these on-screen citations that everyone can check that proves these people as frauds, they refuse to admit they're wrong. They are sold into this agenda, and they cannot admit that they are either liars or, stupid.
Yeah, let's not get too stuck into them. I mean, these idiots, like, I'm skipping over things. Well, look, the book is 4 million words long. Would you like me to spend the next 6 months?
And they've got the capacity to read one single line and then take it out of context,
So you've lied. You've been lying. You are either ignorant or willfully lying. So let's move on. And
he says, all I hear is Lloyd skipping over things up with his interpretation, which nobody agrees with. He has to appeal to what other people who haven't read it think.
Let's go down that road. We did that last time. Let's ignore that, okay? So notice they even talk about, now the Talmud discusses a myriad, numerous, dozens of examples of potential illicit sex. It even talks about, with regard to one who performs the initial stage of homosexual intercourse on himself, what is the law? And is he liable for homosexual intercourse? And Rav Sheshet says to him, you disgust me with your question. Such an act is not possible. So it even discusses the impossible. It presents, but is this permission? No. So the Talmud has lots and lots of sentences which says the Gemara suggests, the Gemara rejects this proof, the Gemara infers, the Gemara answers in accordance with whose opinion. There's loads of these things. So one could have someone asking a question, and they can take that question and say, there, proof the Talmud allows X.
The Talmud says some of your links are so small there, they really should be much larger so that people can see the full links there.
I'll just click on them. I mean, these are all, that's Bava Metzia.
Some people are in the chat actually think you're interpreting those lines and that they're not exact quotes. I mean, I
copied them out.
They're exact copies out of the Talmud. So you can just follow through word for word for those of you who are a little bit slow.
So Maimonides, the great scholar, our sages enjoin that a person should not consecrate his daughter while she's a minor until she matures. This is one of the major legal texts. She is minor until she matures, and she says, so he should not consecrate his daughter for marriage while she's a minor until matured. And she says, I would like to marry so-and-so. I would like to marry so-and-so. It is not proper for a man to consecrate a girl below the age of majority. Okay? So he should not, and it also says a man should not marry a woman until he has seen her and approved of her, because you don't want to think your wife is ugly when you marry her and then divorce her. right? Or the woman hasn't seen the man and thinks he's an ass and then leaves him. They don't want that. They want to prevent that. And let's talk about rape. So on a similar note, if he forcibly had intercourse with a young woman and she was later betrothed, what is the law, right? So this is a very big issue for them. So this also affects her dowry, how much money she's going to receive as a dowry, right? And the determining factor is whether she was betrothed before the rape and whether or not she was engaged at the moment of payment. So they have a big discussion about the effect here of rape on a woman's dowry. If he forcibly had intercourse, now why are they talking about forcible intercourse with a young woman who later married, and then she has to receive a financial penalty from the perpetrator? They talk about rape. If he forcibly had intercourse with a young woman and she later married, the fine is paid to her. Now, I know people have taken one sentence and said, look what it says. Well, these are hundreds of sentences, and they seem to disagree with and contradict all the other nonsense. How come these other people could not find these sentences, right? How come they've never mentioned these? So too, with regard to marriage, if he forcibly had intercourse with her and she later married, the fine is paid to her. So a woman who has had forced intercourse is given financial restitution. That is beside any legal consequences from the court. But according to their law, a woman is also given financial restitution. So with a young woman and older woman, if she had forced intercourse, she is given financial restitution. So notice the Gemara comments, this too stands to reason from the fact that the latter clause teaches if they were female minors and unable to bear children, then we immediately return them. The context of this was they've captured people in battle, right? And they are young girls. What are we to do with these young girls? They're minors, they can't bear children. It says, well, you have to send them back. There's no point having little girls that, So, and it says here, this is because the seduction of a minor girl is considered rape. The seduction of a minor girl is considered rape. So, betrothal that a father carries out in his daughter's behalf when she is a minor is effective by Torah law. But under rabbinic law, okay, this can change. She can refuse. So the rabbis would agree that a high priest may not marry a minor under these circumstances. People say, well, the rabbis can marry. No, it says here, rabbis may not marry a minor. Okay, so the reason he cannot marry a minor is that we are concerned lest she be seduced by another man due to a tender age and naivete. And again, it says the seduction of a minor is considered rape. So an ordinary minor girl has a fine for rape. In other words, she's not fined for rape. She is given financial restitution. Again, it's legalese, it's their own legal shorthand code. So an ordinary minor girl is given a fine if she is raped. She has to be given financial restitution, and the court might levy a different punishment on the rapist as well. If the opinion of the rabbis, so that's Yevamot 61b, 10 and 11, and now we're in Ketubot 36a, 3 to 5, is the opinion of the rabbis who say a minor girl is given a fine for rape, and a sexually underdeveloped woman neither has a fine for rape nor for seduction, as she has a legal status that is that of a minor until she is 20. So in other words, she's a minor until she is 20, at which point she assumes the status of a grown woman. So now they're talking about that, she's too young to know, and 20 is when she becomes a grown woman, and that's when she should technically get married. They talk about why is he exempt if he raped his daughter. Now they talk about the rape, father on daughter. According to Rabbi Meir, he's of the opinion that even one liable to receive the death penalty pays the fine. So now, when they talk of the exemption, they say, well, look, this guy raped his daughter. He needs to receive the death penalty. Does he have to pay the fine to the girl? And they said, and one guy says, well, he's exempt from paying the fine because he's going to get the death penalty. And the other rabbi says, no, even if he's going to receive the death penalty for raping his daughter, he still pays the fine. So why does the Mishnah rule that he pays the fine for raping his sister? So the rape of a sister is also considered a crime because it's considered rape. Forbidden relatives are those for which one is liable to receive a court-imposed death penalty. Secondary relatives are those for one whom is liable to receive a different punishment, less severe. And those liable for violating regular prohibitions receive a fine if they are raped or seduced. So sex with a minor is considered rape. And depending on the ages and who it was and all these other, they weigh these factors, she is then given compensation, and there may be the death penalty imposed. So for others, and a fine for rape, and they have a claim concerning virginity. Now, the other claims regarding men may have sex with girls in Judaism who are under 3, it talks about, these discussions are about whether she's still considered a virgin, and when she gets married, she's considered a virgin. So there's a fine for rape, and they have a claim concerning virginity. In other words, her virginity is protected.
Right. If she's under 3 years and a day, she wouldn't be considered that her virginity was affected.
And in some cases, even older, as we mentioned above, there's a case where there's certain mitigating circumstances where she's considered that even when she's older, and it still doesn't affect her virginity. So the Gemara raises a contradiction, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So she's believed. Okay. Now also notice this, marital rape is also considered a crime in Judaism. She is believed when she states that she was raped after betrothal. So they consider a man forcing himself on a woman after wedding is marital rape. Okay. And they also talk about, what about deaf mutes and imbeciles who can't speak, people aren't able to talk properly? In cases like that, the court has to make the claim on her behalf. They need to speak for her, and that rule is taken, open your mouth for the mute, from Proverbs 31:8. And it says the court needs to know about this.
And would you click the link next on the
about 36.
Yes, just so that people can see where that's coming from. That's directly out of there, so people can see that on screen there.
Is believed if she says that she was raped after her betrothal. Here we go. Understand? So that's there. So yeah, that's the speak up for the dumb, for the rights of all the unfortunate. So they want you to speak for the unfortunate, and they consider rape a crime, even in marriage. Now, cases involving penalties such as larceny, injuries, twofold and fourfold restitution, rape, seduction, and the like can be tried only by 3 expert judges who have been ordained in Israel. Civil cases, blah, blah, blah. So they talk that this is rape and you need expert judgment. And what is humiliation? How is the payment for humiliation during rape and seduction assessed? This is an additional damage which must be assessed. How is her degradation assessed? So you need to then consider that she needs to be, she suffers multiple injuries, legal injuries, and each of these has to be assessed, and she needs to be compensated for all of these. So not to have sexual relations with a woman without a marriage contract and betrothal, we have been prevented. Now notice, it says here, Sefer HaChinuch 570, number 1, and this is also quoting Deuteronomy 23:18, we have been prevented from having sexual relations with a woman without a marriage contract and betrothal. This is required for them in Judaism. They should not have any sex with any woman without a marriage contract and betrothal. Notice the two are different. A marriage contract is not betrothal, and a betrothal is not a wedding. And a wedding is not sex. They are very clear about their definitions, even if we are not. So do not desecrate your daughter to make her a harlot, right? This is Sifrei Kedoshim 7:3. Do not desecrate your daughter. One who gives his daughter for the sake of marriage, okay? Anyway, they talk about that. Do not desecrate your daughter. Do not, humiliate your daughter. These laws that one, so we got Mishnah Torah, the Virgin Maiden, 2:17. His laws that one who has sexual relations with a virgin, whether it be seduction or a rape, okay? So they talk again about seduction and rape, okay? They have to give money and to marry the woman with which you had sexual relations. No longer applied, no longer valid. But if you had sex with someone, then effectively you had to then be her husband. That was the thinking, right? Although earlier we did quote a verse that said that sex under these circumstances, she can refuse. That was earlier above. So she's able to refuse. She can say, this law goes according to procedure of financial law, in which case, if she refuses, then she must be paid financial restitution for what he did to her, right? One who seduces gives 3 things, and one who rapes gives 4. These are penalties, damages. One who seduces gives shame, injury, and knas, whatever that means, and one who rapes gives affliction. So they're very, very clear about talking about rape. Rape, seduction, when a husband claims about the virginity of his bride. Now, they're also very sensitive to protect the woman in that if a husband says my wife was not a virgin and he makes a false claim, that is a crime. And he is punished for claiming that his wife was not a virgin, right? So they're very, very clear about protecting women under these conditions. So a husband who falsely accuses his bride of not having been a virgin, so this is taken to court. There are fines, okay? And that is seen before court as a major crime. And it talks about the reason why the Torah uses blah, blah, blah. Seduction than a violent rape. So again, they talk about violent rape and seduction. They have different categories here, right? And one who lays with her is liable to give her the money of embarrassment and damage. So again, anyone who has sex with a woman, if a man seduces a virgin, right? So a 3-year-old girl is considered a virgin. And remember, it says sex with a minor is considered rape. And then he is liable to give her the money of embarrassment and damage. So depending on the age and so on.
You're getting something that keeps coming in and plugging in and out, some USB or something.
I disconnected it here. So it was my phone. Okay, so if the girl had been betrothed to someone else, the penalty would be death by stoning, just like someone raping a virgin. And again, 3-year-old girls are virgins, right? So if you rape a virgin, then there is penalty. Seduction results in the same compensation as rape. That would be a financial penalty, and you might still receive the death penalty. Okay? And it talks about different examples of rape. If a man comes upon the engaged girl in the open country and he lies with her by force, only the man who lay with her shall die. That's from Deuteronomy 22, 23 to 25. Rape or seduction of the daughter.
You're cutting out there, Lloyd. You're cutting out there.
Compensation.
Lloyd, you're cutting out. Lloyd, you're cutting out there. Repeat the last few sentences.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I said you were cutting out. Please repeat the last few sentences.
Okay. Yeah. So the Talmud goes into great depth, right, on discussing different examples of rape and demonstrating that the rapist must pay financial compensation, that the dowry of the woman who was raped may not be affected depending on circumstances, and the person conducting the rape also could face the death penalty. It is very, very clear. Now, the other circumstance is the bride price or the dowry, okay? And it says when she's less than 3 years and 1 day old, their marriage contract is 200 dinars, as their presumptive status is that of a virgin. And it talks extensively of the rape of virgins, right? And it says, now, unfortunately, because it's a legal document, it speaks very matter-of-factly, as if it was a fait accompli, something that has happened. And they say, if they were subject to intercourse when they were younger than that age, the hymen remains intact. Notice, it doesn't say, whoop-de-doo, I raped a 3-year-old. What the Talmud says is, if the little girl was subject to intercourse when they were younger than 3 years and 1 day, the hymen remains intact, and they are subject to a claim concerning their virginity. She is considered a virgin. This is a legal discussion about protecting her rights, and nowhere does it mention, oh yeah, you can have sex. So the Mishnah says, and that is Ketubot 11a, verse 2. With regard to an adult man who engaged in intercourse with a minor girl of less than 3 years old, or a woman who had a hymen ruptured by wood, or any other foreign object, they're talking about accidents, right? And this is also just a representation of anything that could affect a woman's hymen being broken, because this was very important to the culture. For all these women, their marriage contract is 200 dinars, as their legal status is that of a virgin. So they're saying that if a man is engaged in intercourse with a minor girl, she remains a virgin, she can get the full dowry, right? So she marries as a virgin in the future. Her status is not affected. She's not disgraced by this, right? So, and of an older woman whose hymen was ruptured, her dowry is half, which is 100 dinars. Her hymen is not intact. She is no longer a virgin. So you have to know the context of the discussion. Now, the decision to marry, let's look at that, and then we'll start ending off. There are those who say, with regard to this particular mitzvah of betrothal, it says here, it is forbidden for a man to betroth a woman until he sees her, lest he sees something repulsive in her, and she will become repugnant to him, which will cause him to hate her. So to prevent this violation of what the merciful one states, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So the sages rule that a man must betroth a woman in person to ensure that he approves of her. So they only talk of sex within marriage. They talk of sex with minors is rape. Sex outside of marriage is considered both a sin and a crime. So nowhere does this talk about. So people can quote one quote and say, hey, that's permission. But of the 25 scenarios that they paint of what is rape, somehow scenario number 25 is permission and the other 24 are all crimes. So once a woman has decided to marry, again, after sex is considered to be only within marriage, once a woman has decided to marry, there is no concern that she will find her betrothed repulsive and violate the commandment of loving one's neighbor like oneself. So a woman has to decide to marry, which means she must decide to have sex, which means she must be old enough to decide. And we saw the age of 20 that was given above. So it goes on, a person knows that the betrothal of a minor girl is nothing. Again, it is not legally binding. It's not something that is considered lawful. And consequently, after she reaches adulthood, he decides to engage in sexual intercourse for the purposes of betrothal. So, and also they talk about consummation as being a necessary step in making a marriage valid, right? So she has to reach adulthood, right? So the betrothal means nothing. In other words, she's betrothed, there's a marriage contract, that means nothing. But once she reaches adulthood, they decide to engage in sexual intercourse, and now they have a valid marriage. So often a young girl might be married as a young girl, but she's not having sex with him, and then they have to wait till she's old enough till she can have children. Again, there was the stipulation that she needs to be able to be of age to have children, make a decision to marry, okay? When he engages in sexual intercourse with her, notice, after she reaches adulthood, he does so on the basis of the initial betrothal, okay? So now a minor girl can get divorced from her husband, even if she was betrothed to him through her father's betrothal. So a father can force a girl to get married, but she can say no and she can get divorced if she chooses. Again, it protects the girl. They are very careful about protecting the rights of women and young girls. Try that in Islam. See how far you get. Again, so finally, so marital obligations and sex within marriage. Sexual pleasure is a wife's right and a husband's obligation, whereas in Islam, it's exactly the reverse. A wife has no rights to refuse, and a husband can do what he likes when he likes. A man is forbidden. You can read this. That's Ketubot 61b in the Talmud, and it describes exactly what obligations the man has. A man is forbidden to compel his wife to have marital sex. And they say that if he does that, he will have unworthy children. Again, it protects the woman. They are so focused on protecting women and girls. Whosoever knows his wife to be a God-fearing woman and does not duly visit her is called a sinner. So in other words, she's entitled to sex, but she's entitled to loving sex. They go through that as well in detail. And if her husband refuses to perform his marital obligations in a loving, romantic, and sexually pleasing way, his wife has the right to demand divorce and receive her settlement from him. That's a financial settlement as damages. Again, these are all discussed in the context of crime and damages, civil crimes. So the Gemara, so minors. So then we'll finish off this section. I'm nearly done, another few minutes. So a man can betroth his daughter to a man when she's a young woman. When she's a young woman, yes, he can betroth her. Now the contradiction comes in. So the one rabbi says, a man can marry his daughter off when she's a young woman. And someone else says, no, when she's a young woman, he can, yes. But when she's a minor, no, he cannot betroth her. When she's a minor, no, he cannot. It is prohibited for a person to betroth his daughter to a man when she's a minor until such time that she grows up and says, I want to marry so-and-so.
Would you click on the link there so that people can see that as well, just so they can see where those are coming from?
A man can betroth his daughter to a man when she's a young woman. And the Gemara says when she's a young woman, yes, he can. But when she's a minor, no. When she is a minor, no, he cannot betroth her. So the law changes. If you look at the early history, in the beginning, there was some degree of acceptance of this. And as we go through the history of the Talmud, as we go later and later in history, eventually the answer is no, it's not allowed. It shouldn't be done. So this statement, where was I? So if a father betroths his daughter when she's a minor and incapable of forming an opinion of the husband, she may later find herself married to someone she does not like. So betrothal can come many years before actual marriage, right?
Yeah,
So
and
if a father,
Judaism is matrilineal, not patrilineal, so they give more credence to what the mother wants or the woman wants.
correct, yeah. So also it says here, Beit Shammai's reason is that a man would not readily render his sexual act licentious sexual intercourse. So now they're talking about no one would consider this type of marriage with an adult marriage. Okay, so they talk about it is known that the marriage of a minor girl is given by rabbinic law, right? And then he says, but a man would not would not want his sexual act considered licentious. If he had intercourse with the minor girl and the marriage was later annulled by her refusal, then his act was outside the context of marriage and is regarded as licentious. In other words, sinful, and possibly could have legal ramifications or financial ramifications because he then owes her a financial settlement. If she walks away from the marriage because he was in the wrong, she gets paid out, right? So in other words, they talk about marriage of a minor girl and they say, but who would want to risk the fact that he forces himself, is then considered to be conducting illicit sex, and then the marriage is annulled, she walks away, he was in the wrong, and he's now legally liable. Those that play with children delay the advent of the Messiah. So that was Yevamot 107a8. Now we're talking about Nidda, which is in the
Just click on
marriage.
the link for each one so people can see those up there on the other side while you're reading, while you're
I mean,
discussing
we're going to put
it.
the document out, right? So I mean, they can
Yeah,
read this
you know,
themselves.
but the issue is your links there are so small that nobody can see
Yeah,
those.
they get in the way. But yeah, so with regards to Beit Hillel, it is known that the marriage of a minor girl is allowed by rabbinic law. Okay, and therefore no one would would confuse. So no one would confuse this type of marriage with an adult marriage. So marriage with a minor is different, is considered different of that of an adult. But he says that a man would not readily render his sexual act licentious if he had intercourse with a minor and was later annulled. So there are lots of these prohibitions and reasons not to have sex with minor girls. There is nowhere permission to go ahead and says, yes, you may have pedophilic sex.
Right.
Every prohibition we see is completely against it. No sex outside of marriage. Marriage with minors is considered rape. It says so 4 times. I found 4 times. I don't know why guys like Rabbi Heikel Moffman can't find that. Maybe I need to send him this link. So our rabbis taught those that play with children delay the advent of the Messiah. Okay? And could be meant by those that play with children, in other words, kiddie fiddlers, and are not such people subject to stoning. Okay? Are not such people subject to stoning?
Yeah, those that practice pederasty are not such people subject to stoning? I mean, that's very clear there. It's perfectly clear.
Pederasty are not such people subject to stoning. Kiddie fiddlers, they say, should be killed. Now, they don't go and do it, but they say, look, I mean, this is a heinous crime. It's against the law. Are they not deserving of destruction by flood? Because that is what the people did prior to the flood. That's why God brought the flood, according to Judaic tradition and Christian tradition. It was considered a sin, and vile sin at that. And it was against their law. So to do so would be violating both Jewish religion, Christian religion, and Jewish law. So those that marry minors are not capable of bearing children. And again, we've spoken about how they talk about there's no point of having a young wife if you can't have children. And also, in fact, it's very important for them to have children. And having sex with a minor can actually destroy her ability to have a child. It's, for instance, Muhammad married a 6-year-old. He was having his wicked way with her, and she was unable to bear children because sex with an adult when you're that young actually destroys the womb, and thus she could never have children. She never had children, right? So again, the Jews are very, very sensitive about this, and they said, no, that's wrong, that's off. So a Jewish girl's legal virginity status does not take effect until the age of 3. Therefore, any girl who converts to Judaism below the age of 3 has the legal status of a Jewish virgin and may marry a Kohen. Now, this is the last 3 or 4 paragraphs, and I'm done. But what you have is there's another passage that people throw out about, and they deliberately remove one sentence from it, which changes the meaning. They strip out a sentence and they say, oh, it says that the rabbis can marry a 3-year-old. No, it says that if a girl's parents had converted and she was under the age of 3, she's considered a Jewish virgin. But if she was older than 3 years and 1 day, he's not able to marry her because she would then not be considered a Jewish virgin. In other words, she's no longer above 3 years and 1 day. That unfortunately disqualifies her from future marriage with a rabbi, right? So, or the high priest anyway, at the very least. So any girl who converts to Judaism below the age of 3 has the legal status, and she may marry a Kohen. Okay, that's whatever that's, okay. So when she's a child, no. A man may marry off his daughter when she's a minor. We went through this. When she's a child, no. It is forbidden for a man to marry off his daughter. So then we'll finish here. The Gemara asks, okay, divorce, okay, we've done that already. We've covered that. So she can be divorced against her will, but not married against her will. We've spoken about the sexual relations with a child that delays the coming of the Messiah. It is such a severe sin that it will prevent the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, from arriving. And notice, someone sent us this quote. He says he owns a full set of the Talmud books, and he copied and pasted it, whatever. So anyway, so all of these things talk about the age at which the girl converted, not the age at the time of marriage. Okay. So for instance, here's the quote: a proselyte who's under the age of 3 years and 1 day is permitted to marry a priest. What that means is that if she converted, if her parents converted prior to when she was 3 years and 1 day, in the future, she may marry a priest. But notice they strip out a sentence and then this is pasted in, and this is a different font to the rest of the book. The full thing, and it says, but all the women children that have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Notice they remove this sentence. A female convert who converted when she was less than 3 years old and 1 day is permitted to marry into the priesthood. Okay? That's all it says, that women who have converted younger than that age may marry into the priesthood later, and those not before. Okay, so that really is it from me. Hopefully that covers that.
Yeah, great job. And of course, we have to re-emphasize that what these things say, and people are still upset about this 3 years and a day thing. What it means is that when they're an adult later on in life, if they are molested as a child, if it's before 3 years and a day, it does not affect their virginity at their marriage time as an adult. And, people, we just did a whole hour and 45-minute presentation exposing all of this and showing the quotes on screen. So, we recommend those people who still can't grasp this, they might be, brain damaged or whatever, to just go back and rewatch this episode if you need to watch it 10 times to understand what the citations say and follow along, then you can do that. So,
well, he says that 3 years and 1 day and caught in a lie, but it says you're not allowed to marry a minor. You're not allowed to have sex with a minor. You're not allowed to have sex without being married. The girl must be old enough to say, I want to marry. She must be old enough to say who she's going to marry, right? And he says, we just caught Lloyd in a lie. No, we caught you in a lie. You've been lying for years. So we've just stipulated here that that is simply the age at which she converted, at least her parents converted. And if it was before 3 years and 1 day, in the future, she may marry. We just showed you all of the statements that talk about marriage and betrothal, all different things, and about she has to be old enough to decide to get married. You cannot decide to get married at 1.5, just in case they think, in case maths is different in Australia, or you didn't have enough oxygen at birth.
Right. Well, and this is the same guy demanding that all gays be killed as well. So, I mean, he's clearly got some psychological...
He wants that gays be stoned to death.
Right.
Very interesting.
And he can't, we've shown all of this and proven solidly that Activist News, Daniel at Activist News, is completely wrong and lying. And he has clearly no integrity to just say, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm sorry. That would require him to be a man. So
yeah. No, we spoke about this when we started the series, that once we show that these quotes have been falsified, are people going to admit fault, or they're going to start hating us? We asked which, and I said we know which they're going to do. They're not going to admit wrong. So I've got 3 quotes here, which are commonly falsified quotes from the Talmud. Shall I just go through these?
Yeah,
and then
please.
finish. So there's a very common quote which has always said, Baba Kama 37b, if an ox of an Israelite gores an ox of a Canaanite, there's no liability. But if an ox of a Canaanite gores an ox of an Israelite, the payment is to be in full. That quote has gone around. It's been around for a long time. The sages said, this statement is difficulty, whichever way you look at it. Now, I'm skipping over some stuff here, but it talks about with regard to an ox of a Jew that gored the ox of a Gentile. It says here, when a Gentile's ox gores that of a Jew, he should also be exempt from liability. Notice, when a Gentile's ox gores that of a Jew, he should also be exempt.
So why do you suppose they're always omitting the next lines in this stuff?
And then even when a Jew's ox, now notice, even when the ox of a Jew gores that of a Gentile, the owner of the belligerent ox should be liable. So if the ox of a Jew gores the ox of a Gentile, the Jew is liable.
So how do Heiko Moffman and these other people get these things so entirely wrong? Why can't they read the very next lines?
I don't know. I was taught to read at school. I'm very glad. Maybe first world education is different. Yeah. So it says very simply, when a Gentile's ox goes that of a Jew, he should also be exempt from liability. And even when a Jew's ox goes that of a Gentile, the owner should be liable. I mean, that is Bava Kama 38a too. Let me just bring that up here. This discussion is available. That's right here. So you can read that for yourself. Now, unfortunately, the Bava Kama 37b is where the comment occurs, right? Or where they reference. You've got to go about 10 paragraphs down to the next chapter, to chapter later, right? So the answer to that is in the next chapter, which is here. When a Jew's ox goes that of a Gentile, the owner of the belligerent ox is also liable. In other words, it's fair play. The law needs to be applied fairly. So this statement is a lie. It's a flat out lie. Unless you guys have the hidden Talmud, the secret Talmud, you want to send us a copy so we can see what it really says.
Everybody, make sure you get that from Activist News. He claims
$50,000. Activist News.
Activist News, yeah. And we've shown all the full quotes on screen. He's still trying to say that we're defending or dismissing pedophilia. You know, it's like you can't possibly be more brain dead than this guy.
How come everybody? Yeah. So Avodah Zarah, Christians have intercourse with animals. Okay, Christians basically have bestial sex. That is a common quote as well. Avodah Zarah 22a. The Mishnah says, one may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they are suspected of bestiality. That is a statement that is thrown out. It's a question, really. Since even Gentiles, the very next sentence says, even Gentiles are prohibited from engaging in bestiality. Okay? But a Jew who places his animals there is guilty of violating the prohibition. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. Now it goes on. Yeah, but if you give them an animal while you're tempting them, okay? But then it goes on to the next paragraph. With regard to the assumption that Gentiles are suspected of bestiality, the Gemara raises a contradiction. One may purchase an animal from Gentiles for use as an offering, and there is no concern that it might be unfit due to it being an animal that copulated with a person, or due to it being an animal that was the object of bestiality. I'll click on the freaking link. You guys can read this yourselves. Okay. So links come up. Give it a second. Right. So did it load? 22A1. Do I have the right one?
You have 22A11 there. Click the link again.
It's 22A B1. Hold on. Yeah, no, it's actually 22B1.
You would just click the link again on your other side there. You would touch something and it went haywire there.
Okay. 22A11 to 22B1. Here we go. And it says, so one may purchase an animal from the Gentiles for use as an offering, and there's no concern that it is unfit due to it being an animal that copulated with a person, or due to it being an animal that was the object of bestiality, or due to it having been set aside for idol worship, or due to the animal being worshipped. They say, no, nonsense. So the question is raised, is this safe? And a paragraph read, it says, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And again, it goes on here. A Gentile protects and thereby spares his own animal so that it will not become barren, because sex like that will cause the animal to become barren, just like sex with children causes them to become barren. Since an act of bestiality may cause an animal to become barren, there is no concern that the Gentile engaged in immoral behavior with it. It says, it answers, it puts forward the question and it answers it and says there is no concern about that. So how come someone reads the initial opening statement, the question effectively, and then ignores the rest? I can read more than one sentence without falling asleep. How come great scholars are unable to? Okay, so I think that puts that one to bed. And then Bava Batra 10b, even the kindness of Gentiles towards Jews is a sin. That's a heck of a long discussion. That's a really long discussion. This is most of it here. You can see this is a very long discussion that goes on forever. Okay, it's a very lengthy discussion. So someone grabs one sentence, which is a contradictory or conflicting opinion, and then what we've got is the answers, okay? And really it's a discussion on donations of charity. And I'll just go to the end because just to shorten this. Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai said to them, the verse should be understood as follows. Just as a sin offering atones for Israel, so charity atones for the nations of the world. Right? It's that simple. So even the kindness of the Gentiles towards Jews is a sin. No, it goes on. It discusses that. Okay, it talks about sin, and it talks about people being insincere about giving alms, giving charity, but in their hearts they aren't being honest. They aren't being sincere. They're just doing it for the show, for the world. But he says no. But charity atones for the sin. So that's the question is answered, and it's a very different context once you read through the entire thing. Okay, so it's a massive debate back and forth with contradictory statements, and eventually they say, no, look, charity is important and it atones for the sin of the world. So yeah. Anything else, Jan? I'm done.
No, I think that's good. We've thoroughly refuted these, these hate groups like the GDL and Activist News, etc. So, next week what we're going to do is have an episode regarding cannabis and MK Ultra rather than go on with this series. Lloyd needs a break for a couple weeks, and then we'll have Lloyd back for part 5 of this series in about 3 weeks.
Oh my gosh, this guy's talking about the Noahide laws being diabolical. I mean, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt actually,
yeah, it's like, okay,
it's from the Bible. Hello. It's called the 10 Commandments. 5 of them are in the 10 Commandments.
Right. And we've already covered this in part 1. So those of you who are, a little slow in the brain power category, just go back and play part 1. We've already exposed that the whole Noahide law thing is another fabrication of the hate groups. So just go back and check that. And, we appreciate everybody who's supported the show. Also, thanks to all of you who have put out all of these fake hit piece videos. We really appreciate the publicity that you've all provided us in the show. It's really helped some of the, shows get more traction. So we really appreciate your efforts and the disinformation and hate that you all have put out. And so thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. Thanks all for the super chats. Somebody's asking if get Michael Jones on. We've already had him on. I've had him on like 3 times already. But we need to stop appealing to, ad veracundium or, appeal to
sources. This is right out of the book.
Hold on. Let me finish. We need to stop appealing to second and third hand sources, ad veracundium fallacies, or appeal to authority. Look at the primary citation. Stop having, Heiko Moffman and E. Michael Jones and all of these people tell you what to think. Learn to look up the citations yourself, and then you can see plainly that these people are frauds. Or I'm not saying E. Michael Jones is, but Heiko Moffman and Activist News, HT, all of these people, you can see that they're spinning lies and selling lies, and learn to have the confidence in yourself to check those primary citations. And I guess that's it. You got anything else to add there, Lloyd?
No, that's it.
All right. Well,
unfortunately, Yeah. I mean, so yeah, let's just leave it at that. I mean, we'll just call it a day.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone, and please send your donations, logosmedia.com. And Lloyd, why don't you post up your email address for donations as well, so that people can.
Thank you. Well,
and I'll post mine up here again as well. And really appreciate all the support and donations from those of you who have the IQ to, appreciate honest work. It's greatly appreciated.
thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed that series. I've got other things I need to do for a while, so we'll be back in a few weeks. We'll discuss Jesus in the Talmud. We'll discuss we'll discuss rabbinic, the rabbis and the objections to rabbinic Judaism versus biblical Judaism and so on. But that needs some time to be researched. So yeah, thank you very much. And we do appreciate your time, and thank you for listening.
All right. Thanks everybody, and good night.
Good night.